Good morning. Oh, no problem. Thank you. We're glad to be here, aren't we? Good morning, Representative Phair,
Here.
Representative Byron,
Here.
Representative Locke, Representative Northrup, Representative Oakley, Representative Storer. She's here. Oh, okay, we've got her. Okay, way to go. Representative Strzok. Here. Representative Zwanitzer and Chairman Harshman. Thank you.
Okay, this, just for folks, appreciate you being here. Now, this is talking about our schedule. So we've actually scheduled a second meeting today because we've got 4 bills that are in the Revenues Committee's possession, and we're going to work all 4 of those bills today. So we for sure want to get 2 done today. So when we go to public comment, I'll look at our time. We'll probably put a limit of 30 or 45 minutes to each side of the issue so we can work these expeditiously. If you've never been to a legislative, how many first time ever legislative meeting here? Okay, good. Appreciate you being here. And how this all works, just a reminder that all the questions and discussions go through the chair, right? And that's the process. So we don't get one-on-ones between legislature or people who are testifying. The other deal, in this committee, in this same room, we had a senator got a little irritated with some amendments to her bill the other day. I heard it was on even on TikTok. I've never been on TikTok, but let me just say this. We're not going to do that here. And so if we amend your bill and pass it on, we amend your bill and pass it on. And then there's a new part to that game. There's a lot of steps in this, right? And so that's all part of that process, but we're not going to have a little outburst like that in the committee. It's not going to be tolerated. Okay. So we're all here. Hey, sun came up again in the east and we live in Wyoming, the greatest state in America. So no matter how tough we got it pretty good. And so I just want to make that point because we've got some bills that people are very, very passionate about. That's a beautiful thing, but it's all good. And so that's where we're at. And we're going to try to make these things better and move them forward to work for our state. Okay, so that's the ground rules on that. Committee, anything else? I think I covered that. Okay, then so the first bill that we have on our list is Senate File 101. The sponsors here, if you would come up, Senator Ide, and you take us through your bill, we'd sure appreciate it. Good morning and welcome to House Revenue.
Thank you, Chairman Harshman, members of the Revenue Committee. I'm Bob Ide. If any of you don't know me, I think you all do, but Senate District 29 in Corona County. So what we have here is a little gold bill that everybody's talking about. 2018, we got you guys passed the Wyoming Legal Tender Act, and it was a real popular bill. It went through both houses pretty fair order. So basically, this is an amendment to that original bill in 2018. It just adds one more section to it. And I'll kind of take you through the original bill just because that kind of sets the stage of it and then tell you what this amendment does. So, so the original bill, it was back then, it was House Bill 103. It was called the Wyoming Legal Tender Act.
Just who was prime sponsor of that?
Who was the prime sponsor? Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Rest in peace, Roy Edwards.
Yeah, Lord rest his soul.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we've had this issue many times and we appreciate his work. Okay, go ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for mentioning that, Chairman Harshman. So the reason for the original bill was to eliminate taxes primarily on precious metals. And, you know, that's what the bill said. That was its preamble in there was specie and specie legal tender shall not be taxed. And then the bill describes, a lot of people don't, know what specie and specie legal tender are. And that defined that in the bill in 103. And I'll just kind of go through that. So it sort of sets the stage on this. So basically it says legal tender means a recognized medium of exchange for the payment of debt and taxes. And it's kind of plays off. It's just kind of reaffirms what the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 10 That says in our US Constitution is still the supreme law of the land is the only money in there. It says no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin tender in payment of debts. So that's kind of why we describe legal tender in that original bill. And then specie, it defines specie. Specie means coin having gold or silver content, which is coin stamped or imprinted with its weight and purity and valued primarily based on its metal content and not its form. And then the rest of that legal tender bill basically just defined what specie legal tender is. And the definition in that bill in 2018 was specie coin issued by the United States government at any time. And the same thing, specie coin issued by any foreign government at any time. And then there was Romanet 3 that said any other specie that a court of competent jurisdiction may final an unapprovable order rules to be within state authority. So that was the thrust of the bill. It eliminated taxes. It defined what, legal tender was, what specie legal tender was, and just kind of reaffirmed the U.S. Constitution that, it does say that states shall accept nothing but gold and silver. We changed that with, laws later on made the, when we got to central bank in 1913 and the Federal Reserve notes, and things kind of changed. So anyway, that's what we're playing off of here is that original bill. So what this amendment does is I'll just go through the catch title here, and in the essence of time, the catch title pretty much explains the bill. So I won't go through the entire thing, just it's almost redundant. So basically what this bill does, it says it's requiring the state to provide for the payment of mineral taxes by specie or specie legal tender. Next one is requiring the state treasurer to determine and provide exchange rates for specie and specie legal tender. The next one is requiring the state treasurer to exchange specie and specie legal tender for other legal tender currencies. And the last one is requiring the state treasurer to hold and invest specie and specie legal tender. It's a real simple bill. We originally started this bill out to where the localities, state and local taxes could be paid, at the county assessor's office or treasurer's office in the counties. And, we heard from the Department of Revenue how that created some issues with trying to set that up. So we amended that bill in committee, or it was after we heard that in the Senate committee, Revenue Committee, we amended that out of there. So we just made it strictly mineral taxes, severance taxes. The chances of that happening are probably slim to none right now, but what we really want to do is get things set up for the treasurer to be prepared if for whatever reason we have calamity in the financial markets, we have alternatives to trade with. So with that, I'll just kind of give you my little sales pitch statement here on why we're doing this bill. The main point of SF 101 is to prompt the state to get up to speed on how to deal in constitutional money, including holding gold as an asset to help the state hedge against its high exposure to the Federal Reserve note dollars, whose value has been recently plummeting. Everybody's aware of that, I'm sure, the ravages of inflation right now. The state treasurer's office, working with outside experts such as precious metals depositories, would establish a mechanism for the Department of Revenue so that it's capable of receiving mineral tax payments denominated in specie, gold and silver. These outside providers are experts in receiving, authenticating, exchanging, and storing gold and silver. If at a later time the state wishes to handle more of the responsibility directly rather than overseeing them, it could do so. However, at the onset, it's simply more efficient to enlist outside experts and service providers, and SF 101 enables the state to do so. Because precious metals are priced in the dollar, its price denominated in America's unbacked currency will vary. As a general trend, gold will tend to rise in nominal value because the value of the dollar is being eroded over time. There's an old saying, I've used it before, you might have heard me say it, but an ounce of gold 100 years ago, which was worth about $20, would buy a good suit. Today, at almost $2,000 an ounce, it'll still buy a good suit. So gold tends to retain its value over time. It's a store of value is essentially what it is. And it's a hedge against, primarily against money printing going on right now. We've actually, the last 2 years, this new administration, I think we've deficit spent, added $6 trillion to our national debt just in 2 years. It took us 200 years to get the first $1 trillion in debt. From the time our country was founded till 1980 is when we first hit $1 trillion in debt. And we've done 6 trillion in just the last 2 years. So this is an insurance policy. We're just looking, be prepared, as the Boy Scouts say. Yeah, we're just trying to have something to protect our state and our wealth of what this state has put together. And we've got a lot of dollar denominated assets that don't have protection against what's going on in the world right now. So anyway, finish my little statement here. The state has a large amount of unhedged exposure to the dollar and dollar denominated debt. Since legislation was first proposed in 2019 to encourage the state to hold gold, the gold price in dollars has risen by around 50%. That bill did not pass, and the state still owns no physical gold or silver. If inflation appeared low at the time, but it's accelerated ever since, and now it's an obvious problem. The state remains highly exposed to the ongoing trend of currency debasement. Holding physical gold is a hedge against inflation and financial turmoil. SF 101 provides the state with the tools to get smarter when it comes to gold and silver. Those are the two main precious metals. There's another quote I'd like to throw out real quick. John Adams said there's two ways to destroy and enslave a nation. One is by the sword and the other is by debt. So that's something to kind of keep in mind with what's going on with this bill. By tasking the state legislature to install the plumbing for holding and dealing in sound, honest, and constitutional money, Wyoming can get out ahead in front of today's ongoing monetary problems before they expand into a full-blown crisis. It's our duty to take some initial steps in this direction so that our state is more resilient and prepared. That's why I want you guys to vote for SF 101. Thank you, and I'll stand for any questions.
All right, Senator, thank you. And you know, it's interesting, we have, when you're talking about debt, you know, and every president now has doubled the debt since 1980. It's just doubled but you'll have to come back maybe this afternoon. We got Convention of States. Be interesting. These are really big issues. We're gonna. Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate your.
One more thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Chairman Harsham, sorry, I put a little cut sheets in your packets there, just to kind of give you a little picture of you know the history of the dollar, and you can see how it's eroded. It's lost like 98% of its value since basically since 1913 when we got the Federal Reserve Bank. And then the other little graph just kind of shows how gold kind of goes in the inverse of the the debasement of our dollar. So it is over time, it's a strong protection against the devaluation of our money.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to open this now. Just appreciate your presentation of the bill. And now members of the committee, any questions of the sponsor? Or you want to go through specific parts of the bill with the sponsor? Anyone? Okay, we'll just start Representative Phair and then Representative Northrop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Ide, just when I look at paragraph V or 5, page 3, it says, if market conditions warrant investing in precious metal leases or bonds payable in precious metals, is there anything in your mind prohibiting that from happening right now? You mentioned that this is creating the opportunity. I know we need to have the structure and how we're going to value these metals and make sure that they're legitimately what we're we're saving them as. So do you see anything in statute now that keeps them from doing this?
Senator Ide?
Chairman Harshman, Representative Phair, it's a great question. You know, the Wyoming Legal Tender Act, the original bill, I think basically would allow them to do that. It's a really good question. We've had some questions on that, talking to the treasurer, and they wanted more specific authority. And that's essentially what this amendment does, is gives the treasurer specific authority. So there's really no gray area there.
I want to follow up on that too. That was a question. I mean, I think we could. I mean, SLIB board, the IFC recommended SLIB board votes to do it.
Yeah.
Currently, but okay, Representative Northrup had a question.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question first off was when you mentioned buying foreign coin, essentially, how do you know the quality of it? I mean, I understand it's stamped on it, but there certainly isn't any provision in the bill to be testing it to make sure it is of that quality. Though I'm not saying there's anything nefarious out there, but there certainly could be.
There is. Okay, Senator, go ahead.
Chairman Harshman, Representative Northrup, another great question. I think we'll have some testimony today that can speak in more detail to that. If we do store it, a lot of these precious metals, you know, depositories, private, they have the ability and the technology and the people and the equipment to authenticate anything that the state would buy. And that's I think you'll hear some good testimony. That's a really good question because everybody's worried about, you know, counterfeit gold with tungsten in the middle of it. And, you know, if you're dealing with the right people when you say foreign coin, like that original legal tender bill, it's basically the US minted coin, or like a Canadian maple leaf, or, you know, a Cougaran from Africa. You know, those are the state legal tender coins, which is the same as our American Eagles and American Buffaloes.
Okay,
If that
any
helps.
questions? Representative Zwanitzer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question. Do any other states allow this now, or do you know if how many?
Go ahead, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Chairman Harshman, Representative Zwanitzer. So another interesting question, especially right now. Missouri just passed out of their Senate a very similar bill. Their bill actually required the treasurer to hold a minimum of 1%. Our bill does not. I mean, we could be in compliance with this bill if the treasurer just, not that we want him to, but buy a single 1 ounce gold coin, and they would basically be doing what this bill says. So Missouri just passed that out of the Senate. It's kind of where we are right now, essentially. Montana, they're copying almost our bill. A lot of states are really looking at this. I think there's 22 states there's like 33 states that have limited taxes on precious metals. So I heard right now I don't want to give you a number, but there's like 13 to 20 states right now working on similar bills like this, just because of what's going on in the country and the world for that matter on, you know, just money printing, debt going on, unbacked currencies, and the law of gravity, they can't go on forever when you get that much debt.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, any questions down there? I'm going to keep moving down here. Representative Phair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Ide, you have chosen this mine product severance taxes. I don't see any other taxes. Is there a particular reason that tax was chosen and not other taxes in this particular bill?
Go ahead, Senator.
Chairman Harshman, Representative Phair, another great question. So we started this bill out with state and local taxes. We amended it out of there. It would look real cumbersome from the get-go until the treasurer really knows and the Department of Revenue knows how to deal with it. And that's why we extended this date, or we put a date of January 2024. So they had time to get up to speed and figure out how to get all of the mechanics and the plumbing in place to make these things work. But it's something that would be nice to do later on. I mean, initially I can see why the Department of Revenue was worried about that, because it is going to take time to get all of the counties up to speed if anybody ever wants to pay in gold and silver, or if they have to pay in gold and silver in the future. So this is just kind of getting things ready. It's not something that I think is, it's more on paper right now and getting the treasurer up to speed, and then them figuring it out. And then if things needed to be amended in the future for towns and cities and counties, that would be a good thing to do. I like it in the bill just so we have that option, but we did take it out.
Very good. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, I think we're about, but you're here, so if we have further questions, we'll
Okay.
call you back up. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Appreciate your presentation. Okay, we're going to move to state elected treasurers here. Would you have any comments on the bill? Come on up if you do and introduce yourself for the record, and
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome to
I do, but
committee.
I think there's some experts here that if they testify first, my comments would be a little bit easier to understand.
yeah, I like to do electeds. Any other electeds here? Treasurers, anybody, any other elected representatives? Okay. So, here's what we got. So it's 8 o'clock. We're in good shape. Appreciate your presentation. So why don't we just go, let's just open this up and we'll go like 30 minutes. And whether it take that long or not, for folks who are in favor of the bill. And then, and the way this works, I mean, one person could talk for 30 minutes or 30 people can talk for 1 minute. And I mean, we'll give you a little grace on the end, but I guess how many people, let me take a temperature of the room. How many people are here to testify in support of the bill? Just raise your hand. Okay, so it looks like about 3 or 4. How many are opposed, want to speak opposed to the bill? How many just want to speak on the bill? Okay. And so I'm going to go to the Department of Revenue and the Treasurer's Office. Let's have you guys speak first. Can you do that? Director, come on up. Okay, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue. I truly appreciate the opportunity to speak to Senate File 101. When you read the bill, you don't really see the Department of Revenue stated that we have any role in this. But I have some items that I would like the committee to consider. I did testify when this was in committee on the Senate side, related to the concerns collecting taxes. So I do appreciate the amendments that came out of the Senate. But just to clarify, on page 1, line 1 through 3, it states requiring the state treasurer to provide for the payment of mineral taxes by specie or specie legal tender. However, the state treasurer's office does not collect mineral taxes. That is the function of the Department of Revenue. And when we look at that collection of tax, it's important to note the Department of Revenue does not hold money. We collect tax dollars and we distribute tax dollars. And that function is audited to ensure that any funds that we receive then go to the appropriate tax authorities. If you turn to page 2 of this bill, there's a paragraph starting on line 9 that states authorizing the use of specie and specie legal tender for the payment of mine product severance taxes by Title 39, Chapter 14 of Wyoming statutes. There's where the Department of Revenue comes in, and we are responsible for collecting those taxes. While it has been stated that the odds of a mineral producer operator paying in legal specie probably won't have many. Their books must be audited as well. Income tax purposes, all of those things. In fact, we definitely have entities that are paying digitally, not, we don't get checks much anymore, but, they're doing ACH transfers to pay those taxes. And so since we don't hold any funds, I would respectfully ask that this committee remove the tax payment language until we can have more time to visit with the state treasurer's office on what this process would look like. As stated, many states have adopted similar language to the Wyoming Legal Tender Act. In my research and visiting with my similarly positioned folks in other states, that language is in their statutes as well. However, I'm yet to find a state that actually accepts legal tender other than US currency for the payment of taxes. That is not happening in any state that I have found to date. So if it is the will of the legislature to have the Department of Revenue receive taxes, I look at this very similarly to cryptocurrency. If we are going to receive taxes in a form that is other than US currency, we need to investigate that, and we need to take the time to ensure that the treatment of those taxpayer dollars is held very seriously. We collect those dollars, and every penny that we collect goes to a taxing entity that's has that authority to have those taxes. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would answer any questions. I do appreciate the opportunity to speak. I know this is an important topic.
Okay, thank you, Director. Any questions for the Director? Okay,
Thank you,
thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman.
Appreciate you being here. What does this Chief Investment Officer, do you have some comments? State Treasurer's Office? Morning.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Patrick Fleming. I'm CEO for the Treasurer's Office. And my comments, I just want to clarify that there's a differentiation between my personal beliefs and the beliefs of what gold and silver represents and how it should be owned by an individual or so forth, as opposed to my job as a CIO and trying to manage what the bill is saying for the state. So I just want to clarify that. So as Senator Ide commented, there is not one fiat currency that ever has been issued in the world that has not gone to zero over time. So there's no question on that. It's just a matter of time historically that has happened. The issue that we are trying to contemplate here are other factors that the bill would require. So when you look at it and you're saying, okay, if we received a certain amount of money, let's just say $1 million or whatever, the delivery, the insuring, the hedging cost, which I've done in my previous job, I taught hedging at the University of Wyoming. I know a lot about hedging. Hedging is very, very difficult. So when you have a smaller amount of money, so you typically hedge with contracts. So the gold contract right now, gold is $1,825. One contract is $182,500. That's typically how you hedge. When you don't have those types of numbers, it's very difficult to hedge at the time. How do you take delivery of the gold at that time to make sure that you have it and then properly hedge it? So basically what happens, the way this is set up, there would be a tremendous amount of slippage. Even if we had a vault here in Cheyenne, we take delivery in that vault, hold it, what have you. At that time, there is still, the market moves. Gold is a volatile instrument. The volatility is 13, 15%. So to be able to do that, what you would have to do is have a bid offer spread, is what it's called, a wide bid offer spread, to make sure that you were covered and didn't have a loss. And so my question is how many people would be willing to pay that extra premium in a bid offer spread to be able to do this? You just look at a coin. You can look at a coin, a 1/10 of a gold coin. Last I looked was like $240 some or whatever. That would equate to almost 2,400 for 1 ounce, right? With gold at 1825, people are not, a large corporation is not going to pay that premium to deliver in gold. It just doesn't happen. If you're going to say, okay, I will pay the state of Wyoming $2,400 an ounce when the going price is 1825, it doesn't make sense. So those are just so many different issues that you have. When you're talking about fraud, Citigroup is just in a fraud case right now with Trafigura. They're a 300-year-old company. There was a massive fraud in the delivery of it. I don't care if the person is bonded, what have you. It happens all the time. Are we going to be able to make sure that we actually have all these securities? This is a massive multi-million-dollar company, and they still were susceptible to fraud. Even the counterparties have a different insurance and so forth. It's going to be settled in court, and we'll see what happens. But there are so many different issues that you have on that. Security, if we're going to be taking gold here in the office or what have you, you'd have to have armed guards. Even if you're delivering into a safety area, then that place has to have significant assets to back it up. And so Senator Ide's comment about there's two different things is one, the payment of gold, but then the other side is, does it make sense for the state to own gold? To me, that's the differentiation here. Are we mixing the two? Because if you look at that, then Wyoming Retirement System owns gold. We can buy gold right now. The reason we haven't is gold does not pay interest. You can lend it, but there's all kinds of issues with lending. So the Investment Funds Committee, the SLIB, has decided not to own gold because of some of those negative connotations, what it doesn't pay. We need the income for the state to pay our bills, excuse me. So those are some of the issues that we have. Going forward, the game's changed. Now we have inflation. Now we have a massive expanded budget, which we talked about, the debt to GDP of 130%, whatever. Every year we do an asset allocation. At that time, if we wanted to address the SLIB board and say, you know, this is an area, or if you wanted to promulgate a rule that we had to do that, that would be very different. And then we could have different ways of holding it. But I just want to make sure that this bill and what Senator Ide was talking about seems to me is very different between us actually going through of all the issues of holding, receiving, hedging, delivering, and so forth is well thought out, because those costs would be more than the price of gold. And I just question whether any corporation would actually do that. In times of stress, if the world goes pear-shaped here, delivery of insurance is, I think, one of the last things that we want to, or tax payments is one of the few things that we really will need to worry about at that time. I've gone through all these iterations for 40 over years. I was just talking to Representative Phair. We used to play this game. What happens if that actually does happen? And it's actually not gold that you want to own. It's bullets and food. That's what happens in times of stress. And there are times that you can go back and see in history of what actually happened, because you're not going to be able to pay for a loaf of bread with a gold coin. So, you know, I just want to make sure that what we're trying to achieve and what we accomplish is the same thing. And I'll stand for any questions.
Representative Swanitzer.
Just quick, Mr. Chairman, I would assume all of those comments are similar for silver. When we talked about hedging and delivery, you just mentioned gold and not specie the entire time, so just wanted to check.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Swanitzer, yes, that's the same thing. And, you know, as I said, personally, I own silver and not gold because of that exact fact. You'll be able to buy a loaf of bread with silver and not gold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in essence, Mr. Fleming, so with all of these issues, this could be very difficult to manage and administer. Is that fair to say?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fleming, the bill as it sits doesn't require that this happen. Do you see any concern with this bill going into effect and then you having the option to do something later based on this bill?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Baird, no, I do not see an issue.
You know, my question, I guess, was, and I read the bill on page 2, line 6, it says the state treasurer shall implement this act by, and then it's got all these things. Okay, authorizing the payment. We know that's going to be the Department of Revenue, really, that deals that. But then the Romanet 2, okay, let me ask you about this part. Maintaining, publishing, that to me doesn't seem like a very hard thing to do. Okay, on Romanet 2 on the bottom, page 2. But then when I go over to page 3 and I look at Romanet 3, it says the state treasurer shall be exchanging specie and specie legal tender. Rather, it says you shall do this. And then Romanet 4 says you shall holding specie and specie legal tender. And then shall if market conditions warrant, which we know you already can. But I guess I'm a little more about that Romanet 3 and 4. And maybe you or Mr. Sackett or somebody wants to comment on, because the word clearly says shall on page, the state treasurer shall. implement this act?
Mr. Chairman, I'll go real quick and pass it to Matt, but as Senator Ide comment, if we just did one coin or what have you,
There you go.
then would that fulfill that? And then we say no to everyone else? I mean, but that's not really the intent of the bill, but could you sidestep it? But inserting may would be much easier to fulfill what the desire of the bill would be instead of shall.
Okay. Okay, question or well, I'm going to ask Mr. Sackett if you want to comment. You're at the table, so you got to comment. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I agree.
Yeah.
Chairman, member of the committee, Matt Sack with the State Treasurer's Office. I do see that, number 3 there, we shall exchange specie and specie legal tender. I don't know that we have the setup or the capabilities to become an exchange, for tender in the state. I don't know how that would exactly look, and it would take some time for us to figure out how to implement that.
Okay. Any other questions of these two gentlemen? Okay, Representative Swanson and then Representative Storr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it might be for Director Henson as well. So in practicality, a mine wants to pay their taxes $500,000. The way this would work is they would look on the treasurer website, say this is exact amount of gold at this price that I'm going to ship as of this exact point in time, and they would have to somehow contract and say, as of this exact moment, I'm going to send you a shipment in the mail. I mean, most of these are electronic transactions. A lot of other people just send their check by mail, and that, fluctuates a little bit. I guess my concern is there an issue with that fluctuation that we're either making money or losing money by the time that shipment would come in? I mean, as this is a much more tangible item. And how does that work for the Department of Revenue, kind of agreeing to, if you're paying your taxes this way, this is exact point in time, we're saying, here's exactly the level and amount of gold you need to send in, and then we're going to hold to that, even though it might be 2 weeks to get that shipment somewhere and sign off on it. I'm just trying to figure out how that relationship works.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that was what I was referring to in the hedging side. So when I used to hedge in New York, when I did it for a living, you don't take, unless you have a counterparty that is set up that you have backing, there's collateral and everything. You don't take their word that the check is coming in, the species is coming in or whatever. You actually need physical gold. So when you're coming in, you're seeing in right now, gold is trading at 1825.30. Boom, that's your spot price. You go in and you take delivery of it, and then you go out and hedge it. And that's where the slippage is what I was referring to, because there's so many different things at this time that would factor into that to actually be having this. If the counterparty is not set up with the state, doesn't have the backing, is already collateral, is bonded, blah, 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 you don't enter into those contracts.
Representative Storr had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fleming, I just want to make sure I understand what you said earlier. It seems to me that the goal of this bill, in part at least, is to be a hedge against inflation, and the state could, at this point in time, invest in gold shares through an exchange traded fund. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Storr, that is correct.
Thank you. I think that's good. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And you're here if we have more questions. Okay, I think as we got all the electeds and state agencies, appreciate everyone. Now let's just, those folks who are in favor of the bill, just come on up. I think you can fill all 3 seats, and we'll just take you one at a time, and really appreciate you being here on a nice wintry morning. Been quite a winter in Wyoming. Reminds me when I was a little kid. Big snow tunnels in the middle of the street. Okay, good morning. I'm going to start with Mr. Phair right here. If you just introduce yourself for the record, and welcome to the committee.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Harshman and members of the committee. I'm Josh Phair, resident of Casper, Wyoming since June of last year. I'm also the CEO of Scottsdale Mint. We are a manufacturer and of precious metals products. We're in our 15th year. We do the minting of legal tender bullion, which could be anything from bars to coins for over 22 foreign governments and central banks around the world. So later this year in Casper, our new facility will be producing legal tender for other countries made of pure gold and pure silver. We also produce for some of the largest banks in North America, where you produce physical product, deliver it to their vaults, and perhaps in the short future, some of these banks will choose to store in Wyoming, and our facility will be a distribution hub of out to their banks and to their customers, but also inbound as well. I'm in favor of the bill, and I'm not here so much to say why buy gold or when to buy gold, but I'd really like to talk to everyone about the trends of what we're seeing, and then also why is my company now in Wyoming. And what we're seeing is last year, the World Gold Council said was the largest increase in central bank buying of gold since 1950. And that was back when there still was some backing physically to the US dollar with gold. That's since been removed. We're also seeing a trend of large institutions buying physical product. I know someone mentioned electronically traded fund. They're getting out of those bank products because they have derivatives. And if you read the prospectus, it's not very clear. I'll mention two publicly traded companies. One is Tesla, Elon Musk's company. Just roughly 18 months ago, amended their SEC filings to have gold bullion on its balance sheets. Another company is Peter Thiel's big data company, which is the largest AI company, Palantir Technologies, based out of Denver. I think their market cap's around 19 billion. They did the same thing just over a year ago and actually purchased physical gold bars and put it in a private vault in the United States. So these are the trends that people are doing. They're getting away from the bank derivative products, and they're actually going to physical possession and stored. This trend is growing so fast that when COVID hit, obviously a lot of distrust happened throughout the world. My company never shut down. And when governments are the largest producers of gold and silver, precious metals, coins, and even bars in the world. My company we're one of the top in the world. And a lot of the governments are now turning to a US company to make their products for them, for their citizens in their country and around the world. And one of the reasons I chose Casper and the state of Wyoming, there was a myriad of reasons. I took a step back, looked at special economic zones around the world, and even looked within Arizona as well, which is where we have two facilities and down there currently. One of the big drivers was this legal tender bill. I would not be here today had that not been passed a few years ago. Not only that bill, but Wyoming's ranked #1 in sound money. And a lot of people don't realize what that ranking means. But if you're a business owner and you're trying to find out a good place for your company to headquarter or to operate out for the next decade plus, you need to consider your local community and your state. What's that environment going to be like in the future? And Wyoming is the strongest in the entire union. And I view this bill as a really incredible message to not just the United States, but the world, to say that we are open for business. We're going to be a wonderful place to operate, for manufacturing to be here, for people to be in a really strong environment. That sound money ranking, South Dakota is up there, Texas is up there. Those are the major states I was looking at, including Florida, and Wyoming won out, and in addition to a lot of other great reasons. And so that's kind of a broad brush. Again, I'm not saying that Wyoming needs to buy gold. That's up for other people to decide. But I'm just showing you the trends of what we're seeing since COVID, and it's not stopping. It's going to dramatically change. We purchased the Star Tribune building, and I was up here more than 2 years ago. So this has been a long time coming. By the time we actually closed on the facility and the Tribune moved out, we're about a little over a year into construction. We got another 1.5 to 2 years left. But we were building what would be essentially a private Fort Knox. That building is high density concrete. And while it didn't fit the bill for a lot of other companies, it was perfect for us. We are going to be a foreign trade zone operator, where essentially we're going to be a free port operator for imports and exports for mining companies all around the world. We're going to be doing very similar things to some of the conversations that have been discussed. We understand metals. That's what we do. We work with the banks. We work with governments. About half of our product goes overseas, and I am more than willing to help answer questions today, or off time as well. So that's kind of my quick overview here.
Appreciate you. I just, at some point, not to get off this bill, but we're gonna have a revenue interim meeting in Casper. And maybe we get with you, it'd be possible to take a little tour of your place. Would that be possible?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's in the Star Tribune building.
It is. It looks like a JCPenney's on the outside still, but on the inside, it's changing quite a bit.
Okay. How many folks you got working there? Not that you need to tell us, but how big a project? Building wise.
Yeah, we've been averaging the last number of months between 30 to 40 trades on site, developing the facility out. We have our first vault installed. We've got some of the top security consulting to build this facility out to what we believe will be well into the billions of dollars of insurable facility. The reason I'm doing it, I had no idea Wyoming was interested in something even like this. This was really built for my customers and governments around the world. Kind of like Field of Dreams, you build it and they will come. You see the foresight, you get ahead of the curve. And I've got a lot of information about how does metals get authenticated. I hadn't really thought of some of the things, but I have some answers of some ideas of how we work with companies and customers. When metal comes into us, we first authenticate it. So if someone wants to send in what they believe is $1 million, it's sent into our facility. We're testing it for weight and purity. And then we go back to them and says, this is how many ounces you have. When would you like to lock the price? A lot of times people work off of what's called a fix, a future price. So we say we'd like to sell that on tomorrow's fix, which gives the option for the buyer of the metal to either hedge it or I told you a lot of these companies like Palantir, they're not hedging their gold. They're putting it on their balance sheets. Central banks have gold on their balance sheets and they do not want to hedge it to the US dollar. They want it something different. And so this just provides the optionality for those that are looking. I'm a risk management major. That's what I've done. That's what I do. I manage and trade. I have to manage my own company's books along with my team. And this is a fundamental really program that's being done around the world. But people are looking at other assets, just like you can own the dollar, you can own the euro, the yen, the peso, whatever you want. Gold is the only other asset really that people are adding right now around the world to diversify on their actual balance sheet. So I think in a few years, we're going to look back and say that Wyoming had the option of getting out in front. And I think the impact from an economic impact for this state is dramatic.
Okay, well, I appreciate you being here today and driving down and testify. Okay, questions, Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just briefly, so I'm assuming that Fort Knox wasn't cheap, for security measure storage, all of that was an expensive proposition.
To build the infrastructure.
Go ahead through the chair. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thankfully, I'm a private company and like I said, we have 2 facilities. We've already built out facilities similar to this. This is just done on a slightly different scale for our needs. I started the company in my guest bedroom in 2008. I came from the mining industry. I did mining finance. I handled corporate risk management with some of the biggest copper, gold, and silver miners in the world, publicly traded companies, worked with the CFOs, and saw the need for this type of product to enter the market. And today our brand is well recognized around the world to the point where foreign governments and banks allow us to trust us to put weight and purity on there. And we guarantee every single product. So if product comes in and we say it's genuine, that's on my company to do it. When all we have is our reputation and 15 years and billions of dollars in transactions, that's what we go off of.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Phair, you've heard conversation here about this bill allowing the treasurer to contract with outside services for verifying the purity of the asset. Is this something that you foresee your company being able to do out of Casper for the state of Wyoming? And you mentioned Fort Knox. I assume you're able to store the product that you're working with at the time, but is your intention to be able to store large volumes for entities, for instance, like the state?
Fair. Excellent question. Yes, we do this every day. So whether it's, we work with almost every, I'm not saying every bullion dealer, but I'd say the vast majority of every bullion dealer in the world. So we're actually bringing them material, we're manufacturing material, shipping it to them. Logistically, we're shipping out thousands of packages a week. We're going post office, FedEx, UPS, common carrier freight, and Brinks armored trucks, Loomis, Garda. We work with all those services to be able to bring it in. And to your point, really, this would not be a burden on the state necessarily. The way when we operate for, let's say, we're working for a third party bank, or we're working for another bullion dealer, the metal that comes into us is that transportation cost is, the burden is from the consumer that's sending it in. Once the product comes into our facility, it's validated. And then the ounces are deemed, true, and that's the weight. That way there's no slippage in time. Metal is typically purchased, to give you guys an idea. If the state were to buy silver on the open market, it's not what you see online. We're not buying coins with huge margins. We're talking less than 0.25% type markup at an institutional level. For a purchase price, it's typically it's pretty darn close to spot, where there's no fee. It's pretty much flat. My company's buying raw material. I pay essentially spot plus a tiny premium to bring that raw material into either Scottsdale or Casper to then work with it. So if the material was coming in, we'd be able to validate it. And that same day, and then the state could decide, do they want to liquidate it with 24, 48-hour settlement, or they can put it on their balance sheet. It could go into their own caged vault within our facility that they have the lock and key of, and that those ounces actually go into the state to be either held or sold at a later date.
Okay, very good. Any other questions? Again, we appreciate, I know, been down here for a few days with the snowstorm, so we appreciate you traveling here to testify. So, okay, and you'll be available if we have further questions.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna go ahead. Introduce yourself, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Jay Meyer. I'm a pastor here in Cheyenne, but previously in my life, I was an economics professor at Black Hill State University, where I taught economic history. Also was a senior economist for the state of Wyoming for a number of years before I retired from that position. What I'd like to do very briefly today is put this bill in a little bigger context of other things that are happening with currencies. And I might correct a previous speaker ever so slightly. Not all fiat currencies have gone to zero. The only exceptions are those that are right now in the process of going to zero, including
Confidence, yeah.
including the US dollar and the euro, the Japanese yen, etc., which they all are falling in value rapidly. And with that process happening, I want to commend the Wyoming legislature for beginning to set up a framework for an alternative to the US dollar. Because there is an alternative that's being developed by the Fed right now. And the New York Fed is currently testing a central bank digital currency. And that scares the heck out of me, particularly as a pastor, knowing the book of Revelation and how China is using their social credit system to determine what can be purchased by their citizens and what cannot. And that could create a very problematic situation for Americans. And so I think it's very wise that we set up some kind of a framework because when whatever a country is using for their currency begins to fail as a store of value and a medium of exchange, the economy eventually grinds to a halt when it fails to operate as a store of value and a medium of exchange. Gold and silver have been used for the last 5,000 years of human history as currency. Virtually every society. It only has run into problems when governing authorities begin to debase the coinage and try to stretch the number of coins they can mint with a given amount of gold or silver. So I appreciate this bill. I think it's a step in the right direction. I personally would like to eventually see Wyoming citizens be able to pay their property taxes and other taxes in specie. And I'm really glad to hear about your business in Casper. That's great. So with that, I'll end my remarks and take any questions.
Are you here in Cheyenne now?
I am.
Okay,
yes.
great. We appreciate you being here. Any questions for Mr. Meyer? Black Hill State.
Yes.
Yeah, what years?
I taught there from 86 to 89.
Oh, 86 graduate.
No. Oh,
No,
you are?
I am.
You
Yeah.
are? Wow.
Just missed each other.
Yeah.
Okay,
Did you
very
have
good.
Dick Cummings, Mr.
Oh, yeah.
Chairman, as an
Yeah,
economics
yeah,
instructor?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure did. Okay, any question? Okay, thanks for being here. Appreciate you. Okay, I'm gonna move over here to Mr. Murphy. And if you gentlemen, are there others want to testify? You'll give up your seats and
Yeah.
folks can fill those seats if you want to testify on this bill. I'm not gonna do the for or against, just anybody who wants to. And here's our time. It's 8:30. Just thinking ahead, figure it takes us 20 minutes to work this slow bill. Okay, probably. So we'd like to wrap this public comment up about 15 minutes if we can, and then get to work on the bill. Okay? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Murphy.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Revenue Committee, good morning. I'm Sean Murphy. I was born and raised in Casper. Sounds like we have a lot of Casperites, Casperonians, I don't know the word, they're involved in this bill. And I moved back to Cheyenne just about 2 years ago. I'd been living in Denver, and after COVID, I returned home. I think I'm a part of this group that people have called the reverse brain drain. Most people my age have moved away. I have moved back. And in the course of moving back, there's been a couple of issues that I have taken a fancy to and wanted to support. And this idea of sound money came onto my radar when I was advocating for palliative and end-of-life care to Congress about 10 years ago. And a lot of these virtues and principles around sound money, we have led the nation on in Wyoming. We heard from the previous speakers that we were ranked #1 on sound money. And this bill I see is really as an extension of those principles that we're already leading on. It's going to take some work. And I was lucky enough to have great parents, coaches, mentors, teachers growing up in Wyoming that taught me about hard work. And it's going to take that to pass this bill. We also need to have resiliency. Everyone in this room who's from Wyoming knows you have to be tough and resilient to live here. Just look at the weather and the wind, right? So things that are going to get us to where we want to be and need to be in terms of having some gold in the treasury is going to take some work. And this bill doesn't get us there right away, but I think it sets the path to help us get there. And why this is important, and we heard this term previously, was the central bank digital currency, CBDCs. This is a reality. This is where central banks are going. And as Mr. Fleming said, the game has changed. We now have central banks buying gold. Why are central banks buying gold? I believe it's because they want to back central bank digital currencies with something. You can't just create a digital currency out of thin air. So we're seeing these central banks acquire gold. I think what we should be doing and looking at in Wyoming is having a similar strategy. What are we doing to protect against inflation and ultimately exert our conservative fiscal values compared to what is happening with inflation? So I think this bill builds on our leadership. We have the Legal Tender Act, and now the next step is to do the work to start putting some gold, a great store of value, on the books for Wyoming. Now, that said, there's going to be another step. And that is, we also heard a great comment, Mr. Fleming, always nailing it, bullets and food at the times of economic distress. I would like to begin the conversation. It's not something I think we talk a lot about today, but this is going to become an issue, is also Bitcoin as a store of value and medium of exchange. If there was economic turmoil right now, I would actually want to have bullets, food, and a degree of Bitcoin so that I could actually buy that loaf of bread. I'm not going to do that with a stack of gold or a brick. I'm going to do that with something that I can actually transact with. And we'd had a vision that that would be the Wyoming stable token. Doesn't look like that bill is going to ultimately make it, but this bill would help us to start getting on the right path with where the trends are showing us, but also with the leadership that is needed that we've already led on in Wyoming. So with that said, I appreciate your good consideration and the thoughts toward continuing our leadership in Wyoming.
Okay, very good. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Mr.
Any
Chairman.
questions, Mr. Murphy? Okay, appreciate your testimony. Anyone else here like to testify on this bill, for or against, or any comments? Yeah, I don't see anybody. Treasurer, you about had your chance. About ready to. Okay. Morning, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I guess a couple of things there. Looking at possible amendments that I heard suggested, some shalls, demays, and taking the Department of Revenue all the way out of it. I think the advent of the Scottsdale Mint and Casper has really, I think, alleviated a lot of the concerns about the structure that and the people that we could use to do the heavy lifting in these areas. Where we had in the Senate, we had a lot of questions about purity, whether or not, you can, what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to buy a $500,000 machine to check out coins in every county, but all of those things I think have boiled down to setting the structure up. And the way I see the process more likely than not working is that the companies that are going to be mining, hard rock minerals, the gold and the silver in the state, are probably going to need a place to store their gold. And if there's one place right in Casper rather than someplace else, and there's a good chance that gold is going to be in a vault right next to a vault of the states, and you're essentially going to be able to do those transactions within a very short time period. And I think that the way that we make sure that the state doesn't lose any money is that those transactions, the value of the dollar is after the transaction has already occurred. So there isn't any float period, so you don't have to hedge anything. So the gold is actually in a vault right next to it. You go through the process to turn that into dollars for the Department of Revenue, and the value that the taxpayer gets to pay their tax dollars is actually the value that it was exchanged for. So we don't have to get into this area of wondering whether or not you're going to get a higher or lower price for it. You don't have to have a bid offer spread. You actually have that. And I think we can do that in rules. If you want to, get creative and say exactly what that is, that the value of that the taxpayers' dollars generated will be the settlement price, whatever that settlement price is, it's going to occur within 24 hours or maybe even a shorter time, because essentially you're dealing with one cage and another cage. And so I think it's going to be relatively quick. You're not going to have the transaction costs. I think you said it was 0.25, a quarter of a percent, that's 25 basis points. I know in the exchange traded funds that talking to some of our investment staff, ETFs are going to cost you about 45 basis points a year for the basically what happens in that process. I know I bought some ETFs in gold when I first got here about 3 years ago. And those things, even though the price of gold during that time period went up about $150, I was still underwater because of all the transaction costs. So, holding the gold, I think is in the long run is going to be cheaper if we want to actually invest it ourselves, But I think really what we're just trying to do is set up those mechanisms, because I actually see this bouncing off and looking at a gold-based token rather than a treasury-based token. I think that's but we need to get this type of thing in place so we have it together. And 2 days ago, I didn't know about the firm in Casper coming here and what they can and can't do. And I think it's I think it's going to work. It really has answered a lot of the questions I had about this bill. Yeah. Yeah.
Any other comments in the room? So we're going to go ahead. Are there any online?
Yes, we have
And
three
how many
people
do we
online.
have?
3
Okay,
online.
and we're going to be really brief, and then we're going to get, and so if you could, I think, just omit all 3 of them, and we'll just take one at a time, and really appreciate you folks who are here. And it's always my priority, folks in the room, and I understand Wyoming's got some long, cold roads right now, but okay, the Zoom is warming up. How are we doing?
Mr. Chairman, I've admitted Eldon Stahl and JP Cortez and Lawrence Hilton.
Okay, so go ahead and open up first, and then, hey, we're gonna give you about 2 minutes each, and I'd like you to introduce yourself, who you represent, and where you're actually physically located this morning. And then a couple minutes, and then we got to get working the bill.
If Mr. Stahl would turn on his mic and his
Mr.
video.
Stahl, turn on your mic.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you and we can see you. Go ahead and introduce yourself, who you
Okay.
and where you're located this morning. Then you got 2 minutes. Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. I'm named Eldon Stahl. I'm in Evanston, Wyoming, and representing myself. Supporting Senate File 101. This bill, I feel, is an important step in nullifying the unconstitutional Federal Reserve, which has a monopoly on money, and also reducing Wyoming's financial dependence on the federal government. It will also help Wyoming avoid the federal government's planned central bank digital currencies, which severely threaten privacy and individual freedom. Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution obligates state officials to uphold the Constitution and nullify all laws that are not made in pursuance of it. Officials at all levels of government must push back against the federal government's many unconstitutional laws and agencies and robustly enforce the Constitution and only laws made in pursuance thereof. And just as an aside, there is a company called Goldback, or that makes the Goldbacks. It's Utah Precious Metals Association. I believe it just released some for Wyoming, and they even have denominated. They have this technology to put a small amount of gold in a kind of a vinyl seal of it looks like a kind of a dollar bill type of shape. And they even have it denominated down to 1/1000th of an ounce. So the technology is there. I think, yeah, another person online was holding that up. So when he gets a chance, he can give you a visual of what that actually looks like. So, but would encourage you to vote in favor of Senate File 101 and stand by for questions. Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Stahl, appreciate you joining us from Evanston. You get a little snow over there?
Yes, we did.
Yeah, a little bit here as well. So, well, very good. Well, any questions, members? Okay, no questions. Again, appreciate you joining us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next, who do you have?
Mr. Chairman, I admitted JP Cortez.
Mr. Cortez, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead and introduce yourself, where you're from, where you're at today.
Thank you very much, Chairman Harshman and the rest of the Revenue Committee. My name is JP Cortez. I'm the Policy Director with the Sound Money Defense League. I'm calling from Eagle, Idaho, in the Boise area. And I am testifying in support of Senate File 101 today. You guys have heard a lot of testimony today. I don't want to rehash anything too much. As you know, this would allow the treasurer to use and accept specie legal tender for the payment of some of these taxes. The dollar today, the Federal Reserve note, is a manipulated debt instrument whose value is withering away because of the onslaught of this inflation. And so, as has been mentioned earlier, in 2018, with the passage of the Wyoming Legal Tender Act, Wyoming became a leader on this sound money issue. And passing this bill would ultimately continue to solidify Wyoming's place as a leader on this issue. The bill gives a lot of latitude for the treasurer's office to work and consult directly with industry leaders. Questions about storage and determining currency rates and transportation. Those are questions that would all be easily solved with the conversations with experts and people in the industry. As far as legislation, this issue specifically has taken hold across the United States. This issue has been introduced in Missouri, Idaho, Wyoming, Maine, Montana, West Virginia, and Tennessee. Ohio and Texas already have held the physical gold on their balance sheets as is. In more broadly, legislation to promote gold and silver has been introduced already in 35 states across the country. 19 states across the country, 35 different pieces of legislation. So lastly, last comment I had was about the hedging comment from earlier. The state could choose to hedge or not to hedge the gold on this asset, on the balance sheet. But I think the part of the issue here, or part of what this fixes, is that the gold itself is a hedge against all of the dollar denominated assets you have already on the balance sheet. The gold is the hedge. The gold doesn't need a hedge. The point is to protect the balance sheet against what's on the asset.
I appreciate you. I'm going to ask the committee if they have any questions of you. Any questions, Mr. Cortez? And again, really appreciate you joining us today from Idaho.
Thank you.
Okay, and our last is
Mr. Chairman, I admitted Lawrence Hilton.
Mr. Hilton. My apologies. Mr. Hilton, can you hear us? We can't hear you. Have to turn on your mic.
All right, is that better?
Yeah, there we go.
Hear me now?
You
Okay.
got 2 minutes. Go ahead and introduce yourself, where you're from, where you're located this morning.
Yes, I'm with the what was referred to previously, the United Precious Metals Association, headquartered in Utah. I've had the pleasure of being in committee on other of these bills in Wyoming, I think on 3 or 4 separate occasions. And I wasn't able to make it out in person this time, but I appreciate being able to testify remotely. One thing that I'd like to just point out, to put a little context around this bill, is that the United States government effectively has authorized 5 different forms of legal tender. The one that we're most familiar with is the Federal Reserve note, which in 31 U.S.C. 5103 is a parenthetical. What that statute actually says is United States coins and currency, paren, including Federal Reserve notes, close paren, are legal tender for all debts, public charges, taxes, and dues. So under federal law, U.S. minted gold and silver coin is a legal tender for the payment of taxes. And I think that this is something that states are waking up to, is that, you know what, under the supremacy clause, we're pretty much obligated to, accept this. So I really applaud Wyoming stepping forward and being kind of at the forefront of figuring out, hey, how would we actually do this? What's the plumbing per se that we would put in place? And just to that point, I would mention that the United Precious Metals Association, since the passage of the Utah Specie Legal Tender Act in 2011, has been facilitating payments in gold and silver legal tender for over 10 years. So we would certainly be, willing and anxious to work with the treasurer, with the revenue division, to just, share what we've learned to perhaps facilitate those kinds of payments. I think there was a statement previously that you can't buy a loaf of bread with gold. And I would, beg to differ. This is gold. This is 100% gold. We now have Wyoming gold backs issued, and you can buy a loaf of bread with this. This is worth about, $3.50, maybe $4 at the outside. And it's 100% pure gold.
Mr. Hilton, we're short on
yes.
time, so I'm going to ask the committee if they have any questions of you, and then we're going to have to. But we really appreciate you joining us this morning. Members, questions, Mr. Hilton? Okay, so again, thank you for joining us. We got to get to work on this bill now, and we appreciate your testimony this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to close public comment on the bill, and we're going to work the bill. Members, Senate File 101's before us. What's your pleasure? Move the bill by Representative Bear, second by Representative Locke. Okay, let's work the bill. Any amendments on page 1? Okay, I'm going to flip over to page 2. Any amendments? Oh,
I might have one, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Zwanitzer.
And so I guess and I'm not sure where to place it, but I do think after listening to the Department of Revenue, if we're going to do this, we have to allow the Department of Revenue to adopt rules and regulations as well. I don't think it should be completely in the Treasurer's office, and the Department of Revenue has to implement. So perhaps the amendment's actually on page 4. It would be like a new section 3 that says the Department of Revenue shall adopt rules necessary to implement this act, similar to the State Treasurer's office. I guess would be my amendment, even though we're on page 2, but that's probably the
We're on
appropriate place.
page 4, so then we'd renumber the current section 3 to section 4.
Yeah.
So basically duplicate that language on 1, 2, and 3, but with the Department of Revenue.
Or you could say the State Treasurer and the Department of Revenue
Okay.
shall adopt rules. That's probably simpler. That'd be my motion, Mr. Chairman.
Motions are second. Second by Representative Northrop. Ms. Jeffrey, on page 4, right after State Treasurer, line 1. Do you have that, Ms. Shippen, Ms. Jeffrey? Okay. Okay. Any questions on the amendment discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, please say no. Okay, that amendment's been adopted. Back on page 2 of the bill. Any amendments on page 2? Okay, Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Page 2, line 6, may instead of shall.
Okay, State Treasurer may instead of shall. Everybody, is there a second? Second by Representative Byron. Okay, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. That's been adopted. Okay, any amendments, page 2? I'm gonna flip to page 3. Oh, one more on page 2. Okay, go ahead, Representative Northrop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Page 2, line 9 through 14, delete all. No point in having the Department of Revenue involved.
Second.
So it's been motioned to delete Romanet 1. Okay, and a second. Any discussion? Representative Zwanitzer.
I guess, Mr. Chairman, then would it be a friendly amendment to take out the Department of Revenue language that we just inserted? If we're going to take out the Department of Revenue side, if that's friendly, I would include that in the motion to, if this passes, rescind my previous motion.
Okay, any further discussion on this motion? We'll get to that. Okay, okay, we've already adopted May. All right, any more discussion? Okay, all those, any, Representative Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we should go with the approach of putting the right text in for the Department of Revenue rather than stripping this out. I don't want to I don't think it's the right thing to do to disable the function here. So I would recommend we stick with the original amendment and delete this amendment. So I'm against this amendment.
Okay,
Question.
question on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
I think that amendment has failed. Okay, any amendments on page 2?
Division.
All division being called. All those in favor of the amendment, raise your hand.
May I have a question?
Just real quick, I gotta,
So we had a motion to amend the amendment. did we vote on that amendment to the amendment?
No, that wasn't the motion.
Apparently not.
That's not how I understood it. The motion is to delete Romanet 1. Yeah, we'll take care of that later if that. Okay. All those in favor of that amendment, raise your hand so I can count. 1, 2, 3, 4. All those opposed. 1, 2, 3. Well,
We
you
had
count.
5.
Let me back up. Maybe I miscounted. All those in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That motion has been adopted. My apologies, committee. Okay, any more amendments on page 2? Chairman Wanitzer.
Thanks. And it might be more of a question. On page 2, line 16, when we allow the state treasurer to determine the market-based exchange rates, I'm not sure what that means. I understand what maintaining and publishing the rates that other people are doing, but I don't understand exactly how our state treasurer to be determining that rate. I don't know if I could ask a question. I guess my motion would be to delete the word determining.
Your motion is your second.
Second.
Then seconded discussion. Okay, all those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Chairs in doubt, all those in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, no, that motion has failed. Okay. Flipping over to page 3, I think we're on, that's anybody else, page 2, page 3. Okay. Any amendments? Okay, Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Page 3, lines 5 through 8, delete.
Through H.
Okay, is there a second? That's Romanets 3 and 4.
I would second it if we could divide it and just start with each one and start with Romanet 3.
Okay, let's do. Movers good with that? Okay, so we're on Romanet 3. Any discussion? Bill says May now. Okay. Okay, no discussion? All those in the motion now is, we're working on Romanet 3, lines 5 and 6. Motion is to delete. All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay, that motion has failed.
Division.
Okay, raise your hand. Those in favor, raise your hand. I
Vote,
just heard
please.
2. I got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that motion has failed. Okay, now we're on Romanet 4.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I guess I would delete this only because I don't think we're quite ready yet. And I mean, and maybe it's just I don't feel fully comfortable just letting rules and regs and having this happen without more legislative oversight and more study. I ultimately think this is where Wyoming should go and we should do this. I'm just not perhaps comfortable saying this bill today. We're now going to have, the state treasurer's office be able to hold. If I just don't know, maybe we have the framework set up on how that's all going to work and leaving it completely up to the executive branch. No offense to them, obviously, but just without a further conversation on how to move the ball down the field. So I would be in favor of the motion.
Representative Locke, discussion on Romanet 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm with the change to May and giving them the latitude. And I know that the date has been moved out a little bit to give us time to do this. I would propose that we leave it in and keep the bill intact from that perspective. Again, I wouldn't disagree that we need to be heavily involved in the process. Of course, I agree with a good representative on that, but I think that we should leave it in and give us some flexibility to get our feet wet on many of these topics in a graceful way. Thank you.
Okay. Any discussion, Representative Storr?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and for the amendment, I have not heard anyone discuss the issue of the opportunity cost of holding gold rather than an investment that the state is truly getting earnings in, and that concerns me at this point in time. So I'm not ready to say yes to Romanet 4 at this point in time.
Okay, so the motion is to delete Romanet 4. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I think that motion has been adopted. Okay. Division, all those in favor of that motion, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Motion's been adopted. I can still hear a little bit. Okay. Any more amendments on page 3? You know, I think as far as the May, and I think I'll just say this, and I don't know if I'll move to amend it, but at Romanet 5, if market conditions warrant is probably not the right language. It should be if recommended by the IFC and adopted, approved by the SLIB. You know, invested in, and that can already happen. So I don't want to, I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to leave that, but it can already happen. Okay, so any more amendments on page 3? Page 4. We've amended page 4. We have that amendment on the Department of Revenue, and I think we're good there. Okay, anything else? I think Representative Swanitzer, what do you?
Well, so two amendments, Mr. Chairman. So I don't know if we need the Department of Revenue in the bill now, if we deleted that section on page 2. So I guess I would move to take out that language now that we deleted the wording on page 2 at this time.
Is there a second? Okay, no second.
I have one more than Mr. Chairman.
Okay, go ahead.
And for discussion's sake, I'd change the effective date till 2025. That would at least give the legislature one more, and if I'm amenable to anything after maybe next session, to have a look at one more time, if we're gonna do this, what the rules and regs and structure are. And so my motion would be to change that to January 1st, 2025. But it's friendly if somebody wants to
second?
make it different.
There's a second. Okay, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Chairs are down. All those in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That motion has been adopted. Okay, further amendments. Okay, question on Senate File 101 as amended. Ms. Jeffrey, please call the roll.
Representative Bear,
Aye.
Representative Byron,
Aye.
Representative Locke,
Aye.
Representative Northrup,
Aye.
Representative Oakley,
Aye.
Representative Storer,
Aye.
Representative Strock,
Aye.
Representative Swanitzer,
Aye.
Chairman Harshman.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, we have some standing committee amendments. We'll see how they do on the floor. Okay, thank you for your testimony and everybody presenting on that bill today. Okay, we'll